Hello, everyone. Welcome to JetBrains Connect, topics and talk from across the landscape of technology. Today on JetBrains Connect, speaking in tech, lots of resources out there about how to break into it. Not much on what then. What's it like, the glory, the grind, even the future in the life of professional speaking? I'm your host, Paul Everett. Today, I'm joined by Hadi Hariri, Vice President for Developer Advocacy at JetBrains, public speaker, keynoter, old school Delphi developer. Welcome, Hadi.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Also joining us today, Venkat Subramaniam, PhD, University of Houston professor, corporate trainer with his Agile Developer outfit. In a previous age, a road warrior on the conference circuit. Welcome, Venkat.
Thanks, Paul and Hadi. Pleasure to be here.
Guests go first here on JetBrains Connect. Venkat, pleasure to have you. Can you help us start kind of by telling a little bit about yourself and then how you got into conference speaking?
I'm going to say I got into conference speaking because everybody said I was very talkative. As a child, I was notorious for that. I'm just reflecting on that. Maybe they were actually absolutely right. But real experience to speak really, for me at least, came from the background of actually helping fellow students as I was working through my graduate studies, and roommates and classmates asking, "How does this work?" And then you start explaining it. And then they look at you and say, like, well, that actually makes sense even better than what I learned in the class from the professor. And then you kind of, think maybe I could teach. I wish somebody said don't, but, and then it was quite accidental, actually. I was a teaching assistant. Your job was to grade papers. And I don't know what went into the professor's head one day. He called me up and said, there's an exam on Wednesday. So show up on Monday and answer questions. I'm like, okay, he's absolutely setting me up to fail here because all I did was grade papers so far. So I show up to the class. Thankfully, it's one of those topics that I'm really passionate about, or I was passionate about, which is computer architecture. So I walk into the class, room full of students, the professor sitting in the back of the room, kind of feeding the goat to the lions, if you will, and said, go right ahead. And the students started firing questions. And how does this work? What does that mean? And I started explaining. That was my real first experience actually teaching with almost no preparation, if you will. And I kind of survived that. And I said, hey, I can do this. But I'll be absolutely honest about it. Everything almost in life is an accident, if you will. I used to be a system administrator, and I don't wish that on an enemy today. But my job was to wake up in the middle of the night and install operating systems. The problem is you're awake in the night fixing machines. Your body can only take up so much. You still have research to do, finish your dissertation. And I really wanted to put an end to being a system administrator so I can go back and get my research done and graduate. But they said, no, we hired you, we trained you, you better sit down and get the work done. Until this relatively new language called C++ came out. I had not heard about C++ at all. And then they said, we need somebody to teach it. And I threw my name into the hat, and a professor threw a name into the hat. And they came back and said, we got two people now contending. Of course, the professor gets the chance because he's the professor. You're a lowly TA. We don't care about you. And this is where kind of luck plays out. About a month before the course was supposed to start, that professor, whom I have the deepest respect for, said, I don't care to teach this anymore. So if Venkat wants to teach, it's his. And they looked at him and said, it's yours now. And then I said, thank you. And then I asked around, what's this thing called C++? And then my friends called me and said, I've got an advice for you. Please listen. They said, walk to the department and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you genuinely made a mistake. Don't do this. And then I'm like, well, is it really that hard? And they're like, think of the hardest thing in your life and multiply it by a order of magnitude. Don't do this. And I took it as a challenge, actually. And I spent, I'm not kidding with you, 16 hours a day coding C++, not reading it, not learning about it, but just coding it. And I created an application in about 2 weeks and learned the language in and out, and then spent the next 14 years teaching it. So that's kind of where my speaking experience really started, is by teaching. And a student came to me 2 weeks into the semester and said, "Boy, that's very interesting. You know this so well. How long have you been programming in C++?" I said, 2 weeks before you started. And that's a genuine answer, honest answer, right? But the thing is to really learn, and that's one thing I learned really early is you need to learn very quickly. And we are in a profession where it doesn't matter what you knew once upon a time. What can you know now and how can you apply it? And that's kind of the whole career started, actually.
All right, thanks. So we're talking about the jump from starting speaking over to always speaking. So Hadi, when it comes to conference speaking, you've been in this racket a long time. Give us a little of your background and what it was like to get into conference speaking for you.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was pure altruism, but it was pure selfishness. I remember back in, I think it was around 1998 or so, that I got to go to BoreCon. And for the kids out there, BoreCon was Borderland Conference, the people that used to make Delphi and C++ Builder. And I just loved the experience, right? And it was in the US. It was around $1,800 back then to get into the conference, which wasn't cheap. And then travel expenses aside, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I do this again? Like, I don't have the money or can't afford this. And a friend of mine that I was working with at the time said, you should get into speaking. I said, what do you mean? They're like, well, yeah, you could become a speaker and then you get your travel expenses and your conference ticket paid for. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. And that's how I got into public speaking, right? I just wanted to get into conferences and, enjoy it. And so I started to get into speaking like that. And the first conference that I did was in Germany. And it was, I was giving a talk on, so I mean, I've made so many mistakes in getting into public speaking. Like the first one was picking a topic that I had very little interest in, right? But the point there was I needed to get in. How do you get in? You look for niches, areas that other speakers aren't covering, and you're like, let me go for that, right? That's how I can get in. So I picked a topic that I had some interest in, but I wasn't like loving the topic, which was security and cryptography in particular. So I end up in a conference in Germany talking about cryptography that I had learned a month before. And I ended up with a mathematician in the first row. And oh my God, that was so bad. I mean, he was heckling me. He wasn't heckling me. He was just pointing out what an idiot I was, right? It wasn't even a question of, and I said, well, that's it. I'm never going to do this again. And I did. But then I fixed all of the mistakes, well, most of them, along the way, right? Which is not just cover any topic for the sake of it. And then from there, I actually started to enjoy public speaking, and I actually started to enjoy teaching people and impacting people and them learning things. And then, as Venkat also pointed out, like I realized this was one of the best ways to learn things yourself, right? So I started out with the very, very wrong reasons, but I think that gradually I made them the right reasons, or so I wish to hope to think.
The winner of the least motivating reason for getting into speaking award goes to Hadi. At the same time, though, this is a topic that we're going to go over in discussion. Venkat, what was your first speaking experience? Do you remember it?
Of course, very well. In the conference circuit, ignoring that, academic conference I had to go speak in, ignoring that one. One of the habits I had gotten into over the years, and I really want to underline that because, my heart still is with the user groups and community. And so I used to speak at the Houston Java user group and the Houston .NET user group. I used to live in Houston back then, and I would speak there once a year. Like 1 month was Venkat's time to speak, so I would speak once a year in Houston group and .NET group. And it so turned out that one of the times I offered to speak, this was way back in time, 2001, and I showed up to speak, and there were a few people in the user group like normally do. There was one guy that I'd never seen before who was sitting there. His name is Jay Zimmerman, and didn't know, I've never heard of him. And he was sitting there, and I was supposed to give my talk, and he gets up and says, "Hey, so Jay Zimmerman, we start a conference out of Denver, Colorado, and the people who are speaking in this conference are Dave Thomas, the pragmatic programmer, Jason Hunter, the Kettlebook servlet API guy, if you remember, Bruce Tate, the bitter Java person, and James Duncan Davidson, the one who wrote Tomcat and also Ant." And then he says, "We're starting a conference. The conference is going to be running in Houston in the next couple of months. I want to invite you to come and attend." And then he goes down and sits down. And then I get up and give my talk. And I finished my talk. I had not been a published author. Nobody knew me outside of Houston. Maybe a few people in Houston knew me. And I finished my talk. And I was putting my computer stuff together. And Jay comes up to me and says, "Hey, that was a good talk." I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Would you like to come and speak in my conference?" And in all honesty, I thought he was being funny. I thought he was just being funny, right? Why would you want a guy whose name is so complicated that most people cannot even pronounce it, who doesn't have a name, doesn't have a book? Why would you want to come and speak in a conference where you have Dave Thomas, James Duncan Davidson, Bruce Tate, and Jason Hunter speaking? And I laughed and said, "Well, you're very kind. Thank you for the invitation." And I go home, and there's an email from him saying, "Once again, nice meeting you. Good talk. And I want you to just come and give the same talk again." That's it, nothing more. And I was like, wow, is that really true? So I said, okay, I'll go and speak. And then comes the interesting part. My talk is at 1 p.m. And I walk into the room, and the room is empty. There is nobody in there. And I said to myself, of course, I wouldn't come to listen to this Venkat's talk. Now, this is good, right? Because like Hadi was saying, I have a free pass to the conference, and I get to choose. I get to choose if I want to go to Dave's talk, Drew's talk, or James Duncan David's talk, or Jason Hunter's talk. I can decide that. And I look at the watch, it's 1:01. And I said, okay, let me decide which room to go to. And I approached the door of the empty room from the inside. And as I'm near the door opens. So I step back, and one person walks in and sits down. Now I'm thinking, how do I convince this one person there's a better talk that both of us can go to, so I don't have to give the stupid talk? And then we're having a little chit chat, and about 2 minutes goes by, the door opens again, and one more person walks in. Now I'm thinking I should convince two people to go to a different talk. And then within a matter of minutes, I had 11 people in the room. That's how my talk started. So my talk started with 11 people in the room. I gave this one talk, and I was like, I'm done. This is it. I'm not going to do this again. This is too nerve-wracking. And then, of course, finished it. And Jay said, would you like to come and speak again in a conference in Chicago in a few months? So I spoke in 3 conferences that year, about 5, 6 conferences in 2022. And now I can't count how many conferences I speak in a year.
We're talking today about conference speaking, but specifically professional speaking. We'll define that provisionally as giving a lot of talks per year, or in Venkat's case, a lot of talks per day, to very large audiences as well as small audiences. Venkat, you have an affinity for user groups. And also that little beast known as a keynote. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. So let's build out what distinguishes this from maybe casual conference speaking. Venkat, and we'll go back to 2019. What was your speaking schedule like, both frequency and audience size, and any other criteria you think are useful?
I would say back in 2019, I maybe spoke in, I'm going to say, one conference at least every week, but typically it was more than one every week. And it's kind of a weird schedule because, I often say that I have about 7 different jobs. I teach in the industry. I teach at the university. I do consulting. I do mentoring. I find time to write articles. And then in among those times, I also speak in user groups and in conferences. Typically, my year is, I would say, I would speak in about 20 to 25 user groups every year. So that's about every 2 weeks I'm in a user group. And also, typically, this is combined with a city I'm visiting for either a client work or to speak in a conference. But as far as a conference is concerned, I would say typically in a conference, I would give 2 to 3 talks. In some extreme cases, I would give about 17 to 21 talks in one single conference. So pretty much I'm speaking every slot in a conference. That's not uncommon for me to do from time to time. The longest I've spoken is probably 21 sessions in one conference. That was in India. And the second one that comes close to it is about 17 sessions in UberConf a couple of years ago. As far as the audience size is concerned, it's not uncommon to have about 70 to 80 people in a relatively small size conference to have. The largest I've spoken at, I think, would be about roughly 3,000 people in a conference. This was in Russia. When I gave a keynote, we had 3,000 people. And the next to that one would be, I think, even might be bigger than that is DevOps. Stefan was telling me that my keynote actually overflew the overflow room. So each room can hold about 1,000 people or more, and then so that's again about 3,000 or so, I would think, as an estimate. So that's kind of the size that you're looking at, anywhere in between.
You have anything else from any other criteria to distinguish casual speaking from professional speaking topics, for example?
Casual is, to me, is where you are speaking to a group of colleagues, right? For example, we do this all the time. You may be in a design meeting, or you may be in a corporate meeting where you have to do a sales pitch to certain people. So these things have, they are significant for the business, but it has a lot less burden on an individual speaker. A professional speaking, on the other hand, is you are kind of, at the end of the microscope. You need to deliver this because there are people who have either paid the money or committed the time to be there, and you're the focal point of this presentation. A lot of times, even as a professional speaker, there are two kinds of speakers, I would say, in general. Those who represent a particular company and they speak about a product for that company or a tool or a technique that is related to the company. And there is an expectation these people have in terms of the effectiveness of their delivery. There are a few people that are, away from that model. I would say I fall into that category because I don't work for a large organization or any organization for that matter. And so I kind of pick technologies I want to talk about, but there's nobody, asking me, did you deliver on, these goals? A professional speaker probably is he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in that sense. On one hand, they are answerable to the corporation. On the other hand, they also need to meet that kind of undefined expectation from the conference organizers and the audience itself. In my case, I would probably say life is a little bit easier because I don't have the corporate pressure to deliver something to the bosses who pay me, because nobody does in that regard. But I do have to face the conference organizers and the audience. So there's a bit of an expectation on what you need to really deliver. That's a lot more in a professional setting than a casual speaking, if you will.
I think that's a really good way to frame it. The expectations. You're right. Those conference organizers are kind of counting on you to fill the seats, if nothing else. But maybe to kick off the day in a certain way so that the energy level is all there. One last point before handing you over to Hadi. Hemingway has this line, how did you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly. Did you just wake up in a hotel in Amsterdam one day and realize you just gave 3 talks in 3 continents in 3 days? Was it intentional?
I wouldn't say it is intentional. Definitely not. So I would be absolutely clear about it. I never woke up one day and said, I want to be a conference speaker. That never occurred to me, honestly. So it was not intentional. It was really by way of one thing leading to the other. So it's like you do this and it's a word of mouth. Somebody says, hey, we heard you in this conference. We really like to hear you. Can you come and speak? And the next thing you know, and then having a hard time saying no as well counts into this. So then you suddenly are in 3 different conferences, and it's not uncommon at all for me to finish a talk at 5 p.m. in one city and fly overnight to another city and start speaking there at 8 a.m. I've done that countless number of times. Zipping through Europe, that's very common for me. And in fact, more than preparing for the talk, my biggest challenges, in all honesty, is finding the flight path that will take me from one city to the other. And invariably, I leave at 8 p.m., arrive at 4 a.m., and then take a shower and then go give a keynote. That's not unusual at all for me.
For the record, on our Advocates channel, you have become some combination of noun, verb, and adjective. And when we feel really, really busy about our conference schedule, it always ends with, at least we're not Venkat. Hadi, over to you. Last year notwithstanding, as long as I've been here, you've had a heavy travel schedule, keynotes at conferences, the Asia tour, podcasts, things like that. Do you remember when you switched from casual speaking to professional speaking? And the same question, was it intentional?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was intentional. And again, for me, it's a little bit difficult to understand the concept of a professional speaker. I mean, I think that, what you were saying, Venkat, about the large corporation behind you or not, in a sense, yes, it is. I think it applies to some, but to others, for example, it wouldn't, right? Like, for example, in the case of us or myself or Paul, that we're developer advocates, like for us, I think one of the biggest fears has always been, and I think that this goes for any speaker, is to not become a pundit, right? It's not to just now end up just speaking for the sake of speaking. So it's really important, I think, that you are always doing what you are talking about and learning and sharing that knowledge, right? So if I were to put that in the category of like a professional speaker that all they do is like, go to TED Talks or whatever, then yeah. But I haven't certainly wanted to do that ever, right?
What was your 2017, 2018, 2019 like as far as frequency, audience size, kind of the pressure?
It was crazy. I mean, I made a commitment in 2020 to cut down travel, and I did. So at least I'm keeping up with my commitments, right? But it was crazy. I mean, I remember when Venkat said India, it reminded me of India. One time in 1 week, I did something like 35 talks. Now for Venkat, that's every week of the year, right? For me, it's kind of difficult, even by my schedule. But I was doing an average before the pandemic. I was doing an average around maybe anywhere between 60 to 100 a year.
And let me give one more, and then have both of you talk about whether this is a common occurrence. Hadi, I think you talked recently about sometimes, like, I'm not sure if it was the Asia tour or something else, but you give the same talk multiple times, multiple days in a row. And by the end, you're like, where do I get the juice from? Where do I get the passion? Was that happening to you a good bit, either one of you?
Well, to me, a lot, yeah. I mean, it's, once again, like in the case of when I was doing tours around Asia or India, when you had like the same 2 talks, sometimes repeating those same 2 talks 3 times a day or 4 times a day, it started to get a little bit tiring, right? Of like, how do I come up with the same, to the audience, it's like, oh, look, he's improvising jokes. And to me, it's like, no, I just tried this half an hour ago and it worked. So I'm just reusing it. So then I would start to put challenges for myself of trying to come up with new on the fly examples, or try to come up with new jokes, or try to come up with new ways to do things that wouldn't be constantly repeating the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I think this also draws back to your original question, Paul, and that is, a difference between a casual speaker and a professional speaker, or a casual speaking and professional speaking. To me, one of the biggest disadvantages that a casual speaker has is not having that ability to fine tune, practice, and iron out a talk to deliver it top notch. When people see me give a really good talk, I may have given that 40 times already, and as opposed to giving a talk once. But to me, in all honesty, you can ask me, do I get tired giving a talk? Well, for one reason, they remove that from the DNA when you're a faculty, right? As a professor, you got to do that in a school because you're teaching the stuff over and over. Sure, technology changes, you can change a few things, but still the fundamentals are the same, so you get to it. But to me, there are two things that really don't make me tired. And the first one is, it's the same talk, but it's a different audience. And the audience make a difference for me because the questions they ask and their face shows the understanding or the lack of understanding. One group is beginner level, another is more advanced level. So they drive me to a different focus on the same topic, right? So that gets me excited to give the same talk to a different group. And the second thing that excites me is, even if I give a talk for a year, things change over the year. New libraries come, new versions come. And in all honesty, I'm not the same person after a year because I've learned more things in other areas as well. So my emphasis shifts in a same talk when I give the talk after a few times. And so to me, that excites me to give a talk. But the key for me is not the number of times I give a particular talk. The key is if I'm still passionate about that particular topic, right? Even if I'm passionate about something, I can give it 100 times. But if I don't feel in me that that's a topic I want to give, I don't care even if it's the fifth time, I'm out of it. So to have that feeling about desire to give the talk and learn from that, and that's kind of what drives me into that in general.
Yeah, and I
Hadi,
think
any follow-up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one important thing that Venkat, you say is the audience, right? And but I feed off of the audience, as I assume you do, and many people do. And if you end up with an audience that is not very interactive or not really there, that also, at least for me, demotivates me, right? Which I think is one of the biggest challenges of doing online conferences, is that you don't get that interaction and you don't get that energy that you get from a live audience.
Hadi, one follow-up to you and then we'll move on. Do you find your keynotes like Silver Bullet Syndrome or Welcome to the Machine, are they easier to revisit and give multiple times than something that's just focused on tech?
Generally, yes, because most of the keynotes that I give that are non-technical is essentially me frustrated and ranting. And that's just my natural self. So, and I always come up, and as I say, the Silver Bullet Syndrome, someone came up to me a few years ago and they said, that's out of all of the talks that you've been giving, that's the best one I've ever seen. And I said, well, thank you. But from the same time, I've spent 15 years teaching people technology. And the one where I'm ranting about technology is the one that you think is the best talk, right? But okay, thanks. But it also is that is a talk that will never, ever, I will never get out of material because it's just a thing that's going on and on, I was ranting about Docker 6 years ago. Today, I'll rant about Kubernetes, right? But yeah, I don't find them hard. I actually enjoy keynotes a lot. I really do. And I really enjoy giving non-technical keynotes because technical keynotes is, you gotta make sure that everyone there in the room is interested in that specific technology. Although having said that, hats off to Venkat because you do get people interested. I mean, I've been to conferences where Venkat's, you've given a technical keynote and the person sitting next to me, they're like, I don't even know what he's talking about, but I'm really enjoying this talk.
Well, I was going to say, which is kind of drawing into what I had in my mind as I was listening to you, is keynotes are a lot more difficult to prepare for, and part of the reason for that is, for one, you don't have a small group of the audience, in listening to you. You got the entire conference listening to you. That's nerve wracking, right? So the pressure on you to do the right thing is enormous. And to your point, Paul, earlier, is one of the things that's expected of a keynote speaker is a conference, the rest of the conference, or if not the rest of the day, the tone can be different depending on the conference speaker, the keynote speaker. People leave the room, and it's not unusual for the rest of the day, people saying, yeah, like, and then refer to something they heard in the keynote. And if the keynote speaker really is depressing and delivers a doomsday message, yes, it's the reality, unfortunately, but that's not what they want to spend the rest of the day, using Kleenex to wipe their tears off their eyes. So the responsibility of the keynote speaker is you want to establish the grim reality to the audience. That's important, right? Because you cannot change unless people realize there is a reason to change. But there's a curve in a keynote, right? You are here and you take through the sad music, and people are like, oh my gosh, life is miserable right
Yeah.
now. I can't bear with this. And please don't stop there. Come out uplifting and show them, well, here's how you can fix this when you get back to work. And people are like, okay, I know what the problem is, but I got some tools with me to go fix it. That's a burden on the keynote speaker to carry it, because it's easy to derail right in the middle and leave people in shambles. And it's like, sorry, you're all doomed. Good luck with your little life is not going to help anybody, right? So that's kind of the challenge with this also. The other thing is, with the technical session talk, it's more tactical. You got one topic you want to convey, you convey the topic, you give them a set of tools and say, here's how you go do this, best wishes, try it out. With a keynote, its overarching scope is much broader. So you got to leap for something really bigger as well. And then you want to have the technical details in there if you want to, but it's got to also be general enough to apply to a broader set of audience as well. And then that's what makes keynote speaking more challenging, but at the same time exciting as well, I think. And it takes for any professional speaker, a lot of us will aspire to become keynote speakers, but I think it's important to take the time to make ourselves ready for it as well, because that's a lot bigger responsibility for us to deliver a good keynote.
Now that we've covered occasional conference speaking and the jump to frequent speaking and laughed ourselves senseless along the way, let's dig into the core issue. What's it like, the glory, the grind, even the future in the life of professional speaking? Venkat, you wear many hats. You alluded to it. You got like 7 jobs: professor, corporate trainer, book author. Actually, that's an important part of this discussion. But professional speaking has always been, or has long been, a primary activity for you. Casual speakers, they now know what it's like to talk at conferences, overcome fear, prepare a good talk, all those skills. But professional speaking, what you talked about on the expectations, bigger venues, things like that. What's that like? What's it like to be in demand, to have a packed schedule, to give larger talks, and to carry those expectations?
I think, in all honesty, one of the things that I try to do, and thankfully I don't have to work too hard to do this, is not to really get that into the head. I think that's really important, because to be genuine, to be ourselves. One of the things let me shift gears and say something that I often hear and I completely disagree with quite a bit. People talk about oftentimes we say about imposter syndrome, and I'll tell you, I don't believe in that at all. And the reason I don't believe in imposter syndrome is not a single day do I wake up thinking I'm actually an expert. So I never have the imposter syndrome because I never have the thought, because I know for sure that I'm not an expert. I spend my time with people who are amazing in their knowledge, in their thinking, in their capability. And when you are among the people who are broad in their knowledge and deep in their knowledge, it never gives an illusion that somehow that I'm an expert and I know things. And as an example, right, one of the most humbling experience I had, and I've had this several times over, is, I wrote the book on programming Kotlin. I come in, I've spoken in conferences, I know the topic, and I write the book, and then the reviewers come back and say, hey, let me show you why this example will not work in this context, right? When you, for example, Hadi introduced me to Eugene Petrenko, and then he gave me a pointer on a particular topic, and to me, that's very humbling because you think you know a topic, and at the same time, you realize that you don't, right? And you're learning something different, you're learning something new. And to me, that is the key as a professional speaker. As a professional speaker, you are literally walking a two-way street every single day. And that is, you are there to help and motivate and impart knowledge on somebody who is interested in learning. But at the same time, you need to also be there to be that student and learn in that experience as well. And the minute we turn that in our head and we think that we are there to, deliver what we know, I think we're not going to be effective doing it. So the first thing I would say as a professional speaker is remove that thought of you are the speaker. And instead, if you think about it as you're a mentor and you are part of this, I always say there are 5 things I know better than you, and there are 50 things you know better than me. So all I'm going to do today is to help you learn that 5 things, and in the process, maybe learn a few things from you. Then it's a big win for both of us. And that's kind of the attitude we need to have, because we know, right? There's no doubt about it that we don't know a lot of stuff, and we need to share that. And that's kind of the journey that I try to take every day. And as a result, it doesn't burden me at all at the responsibilities. And to a great extent, I would say the number of people in front of me doesn't matter at all. And what matters to me is the genuine interest of the people. Even if it's 3 people, I'm willing to give the talk because they really want to be there. And the last thing I'll say on that is, it doesn't matter how long you've been speaking, you're going to be nervous. And it's important to be nervous, I think, because nervousness is a way for our mind to tell us this still matters to you, right? The day that I'm numb and not nervous is the day I know I shouldn't be doing this. I was giving a keynote in JFocus a few years ago, and the lady who was part of the AV department was putting the microphone on me, and my keynote was about to start, and there's thousands of people in front of me. And she says, you're breathing heavy, you are very nervous. I said, I'm sorry, I'm doing that. And she said, well, I see you're nervous. I said, yes, I am. And she said, is it the first talk you're giving? I said, no, this is the 10,000th talk I'm giving. And she's like, well, then why are you nervous? I said, it's because of that exactly that I'm going to give a talk. And I think that's important, right? So to me, it's not that I've given many talks, but the next talk I give is the most important talk, because you got to work your way every single talk. And I'll be honest about it, right? When I'm giving a talk at 9 a.m., I'm up at 4 a.m. preparing every single day. The day that I don't prepare is the day it's not going to work out. So a lot of preparation goes into it. You never get complacent about it. That's not going to happen, because the day you get complacent is the day you're going to deliver a poor talk. So it's important to prepare for it as well.
Yeah, your point about imposter syndrome, maybe it's actually a good thing if it's a synonym for humility. Remember that you're there for the audience, not vice versa. Yeah, on that topic about having a lot of things on your plate, Hadi, you wear so many hats, you should open a haberdashery. Bad joke alert. If you were talking to someone, you and I talked about that book, Confessions of a Public Speaker. You were talking to someone who'd read the book, gave a few talks, kind of got the hang of it. How would you explain the next step into kind of public professional speaking, larger scale, doing it lots of times per year?
I don't know. Honestly, I would just say if you enjoy it, continue doing it. I don't think that there is a path there as such, or at least I don't know how to define it. But I do want to comment on a couple of things that Venkat pointed out, which I agree with. I think the nervousness is key. Like if you stop being nervous, as Venkat said, it's either you don't care or you just don't enjoy it anymore. But regarding the imposter syndrome, this recommendation has been given as a half joke, and sometimes people say it seriously. I heard someone said to me at one point, just make sure that you know more than everyone in the room, right? And that was for a long time, I kind of believed that needed to be the case. And that caused a lot of fear in me, right? When I was giving talks. And at some point it changed. And I realized that if I come clean with the audience, if I set expectations, if I tell them why I'm here, then that imposter syndrome goes away, right? Because then, like the example of Haskell, yes, I was really interested in Haskell. I really was. And I wanted to learn more. And I said, I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of kill two birds in one go. I can learn Haskell and I can use the material for doing other things. And I signed up to give a workshop on Haskell. And when I went to the workshop, I said, I've been spending the past 8 months learning Haskell, and this is my journey, and I want to share my journey with you. And I want to tell you the things that I have stumbled on, and hopefully you won't stumble on. And if there's anyone in the room that knows better, awesome. Teach me, tell me what I've done wrong, right? And I think that that kind of gets rid of this aspect of the imposter syndrome when it comes to speaking. However, there's a caveat. I think that you need to reach a certain, and I don't know, Venkat, if you would agree with me here or not, but I feel like you do need to reach a certain level of confidence to then take this step of saying, it's no longer about, me not feeling like an imposter, but just sharing what I know. Because when I go back to my early days and thinking about speaking, I was extremely nervous for many reasons, right? One of them was, do I know the material well enough, right? So I think that it's kind of like, for me at least, it wasn't, from day to night. It was a gradual process.
I couldn't agree more. And one of that shift in the mind, you use the word confidence, but I'm going to use the word realization. And the realization, at least for me, is to realize that you don't have to please the audience. That's not what you are there for, right? You are there to help the audience to learn and apply. And sometimes, we all are humans. It's natural for us to feel like we are being scrutinized at this particular point and the eyes are on us. But to really take that away and say, let the eyes be on the topic rather than the speaker who is speaking the particular topic. And to be honest and genuine, to give the answer, to say, hey, this is my understanding of this. It doesn't mean that's the right understanding. And also, one of the things I've really enjoyed over the years is the audience, where there are some superb members among the audience, right? To give a talk on Java 8 streams and to have Brian Getz in the audience, to give a talk on Scala, to have Martin Odrysky on the audience, to give a talk on J-Link and to have Douglas Crockford in the audience, right? Or one of the things I thoroughly enjoyed was to give a talk on Spock and having Peter Advisor and member of the Groovy teams being in the talk. And also, as I was giving a talk related to Groovy, one of my most aha experiences was Paul King was sitting there, and I was critiquing Groovy, and then he was tweeting saying, "Good point, I'm fixing it right now." And he was saying, "I'm going to take your criticism and turn it around and fix it." So that to me is a very pleasurable journey where, I'm not an expert, clearly, but I'm a avid user of a technology. I have the right to critique it as anybody else does it, That doesn't make me right or wrong. And there are times I need to change my opinion based on what I learned. But at the same time, when you see language authors being receptive about it as well, is amazing journey to take in. So I think over time that realization comes into the mind that, let's focus on the topic and make that journey rather than the people. And I think that becomes a much pleasurable experience once we take that out of the equation.
Regarding the future, that part of the core issue, for the sake of discussion, leave out pandemic, post-pandemic, just from where you are right now, do you think you'll be excited about professional speaking 3 years from now? Hadi, we'll start with you.
Absolutely, yes. I can't wait to get back in front of audiences. I can't wait to interact with people. I can't wait to teach people. Teach people, like doing it in many other forms, but public speaking, yes, I'm absolutely. And I think that as much as I think that this pandemic has given me time to reflect, as with many things, on things that I've taken for granted. And I think that, speaking was one of those things that maybe in a way it was good break for me. I'm not saying the pandemic was good. I'm saying that it was a good break for me to realize what I've lost. And I don't think that I will definitely want to get back into it. Whether at the same pace as before, probably not. But you never know that, right? It's like, yes, I'll do 5 a year, and then, as Venkat says, and then someone else comes to you and says, "Hey, would you like to come here?" I'm like, "Okay, sure, yes, I'll do that." And then before you know it, you've got like 30 events in 3 months, right? But for me, it's made me appreciate it more. In fact.
Well, certainly, if nothing else, you have 10 keynotes worth of rants queued up, because you've been waiting on
2
this.
years.
Venkat, quick answer. How about for you? Think 3 years from now, you'll still have the energy for this?
There's two reasons why I think I'll be excited to continue to speak. And one is there is an ever-growing audience who are really interested in learning the technologies and the technologies that evolve. But from my point of view, one of the things that absolutely excites me is when I give a talk or when I work with certain things, I get a different understanding, a deeper understanding. So now I have a different sets of analogies to share with. What good are these analogies if you don't have an audience to share with, after all, isn't it? So I'm going to absolutely be excited to give these talks because I'm learning continuously. I'm getting a different perspective, and I'm absolutely eager to share those along the way as well.
With the core issue framed, let's have an open discussion on this topic, especially. Lots of really interesting specifics. Let's start with the obvious one. How's the pandemic affected your speaking schedule, Venkat?
A lot. So here I am standing in my basement, and I've been standing here for nearly 14 months. I can't tell you how eager I am to get out. It's not the talking that matters to me. It's meeting people after the talk and having a dinner with them, and the talks we have after the conference. The Q&A part that runs after the conference, that's what I'm really, really missing. Absolutely.
Sure. And for the audience, Venkat has a really good talk about how to speak during a pandemic. You don't necessarily say pandemic, you say online, but things about how to project energy with a simple tip of what you're doing right now, standing up. Here's one for both of you, Hadi first, then Venkat. Then I want to see the two of you argue about it a little bit. Something I'm kind of learning in the last year, there's a lot of content out there. A lot of it's really good. It's hard to break through. It seems like quality is now the baseline. So the trick is to get people to engage with you as a person, as a personality. Unfortunately, how do you got any disagreement about this?
I generally agree with that, completely from a sense of humbleness and humility. But I think that people do like the style of speaking of certain speakers. Like, for example, for me, and I'm not trying to kiss up, but for me, Venkat, like I could listen to any topic on Venkat, right? Because I like your style, I like the way you present, I like everything about your talks, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're talking to me about even things that I don't even use. Like, it's always interesting. So yes, there are many times that I go to a talk for the person, not specifically for the topic.
Venkat, over to you on what Hadi was just mentioning. and kind of cut through the humility and be analytical about it, how many of the people follow you because of you rather than the content you're delivering?
Well, there's definitely a risk involved in it, and I really want to be careful about it. Is because there could be a misperception in this case. They get a slice view of you in a talk, and they can leave with a lot of perception in their mind, which could be quite opposite from the truth or the reality. And it also is to a great extent a great burden on the speaker, because now you are expected to deliver certain things at a certain level, or there's an expectation that, hey, you need to really do this because we look up to you to do this. And I think that's important to really separate that in our minds and say, yes, I speak in a conference, but that doesn't mean anything more than I am passionate about the topic and I shared with somebody else. But that's over. Let's get back to being, we're not celebrities. That's what I want to really emphasize, right?
Yeah.
And we are just professionals. That's all we are. And we are professionals with one difference. We have a louder voice, and somebody gave us the damn microphone to us. That's the only difference, right? So it doesn't make us any different than millions of other wonderful developers who are even better than us in so many different ways. And then I try to remind myself of that quite a number of times, and also to set the expectations for others, right? When somebody says, hey, I attended your talk and I want you to do this, well, thank you, but I am willing to help to the level I can, but I cannot turn this into a support service after that. So I think that delineation is important to keep things sane. Otherwise, it becomes a huge drain on our health in general, right? Not just time. And I think it's important to really put them into the perspective and kind of be a little grounded. This goes back to the humility that Hadi talked about, but taking that humility in even further and saying, just because I speak doesn't mean a whole lot of other things that others may perceive for that reason.
On to one that I think will get some heated, possibly agreement. It's related to Hadi's origin story. Conferences that want you to speak for free at your own expense. Go.
No.
Venkat, go.
I said no.
No. No.
I have some very deep thoughts about this. I am going to use the word exploitation. That's what it really is. I'll use the strongest word possible. I think it's an exploitation to demand a person to spend their time and money to come and speak in your events. There should be a law against it, and barring that, it should be considered unprofessional to expect that. I've got very strong feelings about this, as you can see.
I bet in your consulting business, you've had a lot of customers that wanted to pay you in like startups. I'm not going to pay you cash. I'm going to pay you in options or something. And it reminds me of that famous video, F you, pay me. Hadi.
Yeah, like I say, next time someone says to me that, well, you get the exposure, I'll say, I'll go to my kid's school and say, can I pay you in exposures, right? Because I completely agree with Venkat. I think that at a minimum, I wrote a blog post like 10 years ago, which was the speaker maturity model on a twist on the Leonard Richardson maturity model of REST, right? And the level 0 is I pay to speak, which means I have to pay out of my own pocket to cover my own travel expenses to come and speak at your event, right? And you're saying to me exposure. No, I think that level 0 should be completely eliminated. Based then on the type of work you do, you can charge, you can not charge, but I think the travel expenses are a bare minimum.
So lesson to conferences, if you want Hadi or Venkat, don't make them pay their way. And if you get somebody willing to speak and pay for it themselves, maybe you don't want that person. Okay, on to some rapid fire. Hadi, what's the last big keynote you did? What was the topic? How much time did you spend preparing?
God, it's been such a long time. I have no idea. I think
Google
it was,
I/O. How about that one?
But that wasn't the last one. But that was that one I prepared a long time. It was like a 20-minute segment, and I spent a lot of time preparing it. And it was around, I think, present, there was around 4,000, and then people online.
Right.
And that was I enjoyed that a lot, yeah.
Venkat, how long before a big talk do you prepare?
I would say sometimes for even 1 or 2 years, honestly. So I have a very long ramp up towards talks, for most of the talks, especially for things like keynotes or talks I want to really deliver. I'll be playing with a technology or a particular thought for maybe 1 or 2 years, and the talk itself typically gets written the night before. But one of the things I follow is Martin Fowler wrote about this several years ago. He calls it an info set, and an info set is something that I do a lot. So in my computer, I have several directories where I'll be creating thoughts and examples and ideas of a certain topic for maybe 6 months, a year, or even 2 years. And then once I have enough of things to build a narrative, that's when I propose a talk for a conference and say, I want to speak on this topic. And once they accept it, then I will play with it again and curate it for another few weeks to a few months. And then as the conference nears, typically the night before or the early morning, I would sit down and put that into a form where I want to deliver it. So I keep that to a fairly, late in the game. It's a last responsible moment. So I want to kind of separate that, right? So when people hear that I prepared for the talk last night, no, it was committed the last night. The preparation has been going on for months on end to get that material really organized.
I find that really insightful and valuable. And the idea that you're going to plant some seeds and germinate them over a while, and then at the very end, you're going to go and pick the crop. Okay, well, let's speed up a little bit for both of you. When do you say no to an invite?
So for me, predominantly, in all honesty, it's availability. That's the first thing. The second thing is when I feel like the conference is not in my best interest, as in it's not catering to. So let me step back and answer the question a little bit differently, right? This touches back on the topic we talked about earlier, whether you should get paid to speak in a conference or not. And if it's a conference in a low economic region of the world, I'll be absolutely honest about this to you. I've actually paid my way to go speak in events in parts of the world where I feel like they are an economic deprivement or there's not enough diversity. But in a conference in a rich country wants me to come and spend my time, that's a no for me. So when do I say no? When I feel like they are not aligned to my values that I care about, right? Either you support a community that deserves support, then I will give you more, or you're in a community which is really doing well, then it's your turn to really honor that and support me as well. So the no comes usually when I feel like I'm getting an invitation in a community where it's not worth my time and effort to spend my time with no return on my investment. The other mostly though is availability, because I get booked pretty quickly and I can't be in two places at the same time.
Hadi, when do you say no?
I second everything Venkat says. Exactly the same. Yeah.
And hopefully conferences will keep this in mind as they come out of this back into fielding conferences. They will remember this.
Well, I mean, I think it's important for us to remember it as well, right? Because this is a two-way street. If we as speakers keep going to conferences and paying our way, we're just encouraging that behavior. And just to point out also what Venkat said, if it's a user group, if it's a nonprofit organization, all of these, yes, absolutely, we can pay our way. And many times under the JetBrains brand, we go there and we pay our way. But commercial conferences that are charging hefty prices to attendees, no.
Hadi, I think you said the two of you have a different approach to humor in talks.
Well, I guess we both think humor is important, right, Venkat? Yeah. I'm a little bit, I would say that I'm a little bit less worried about maybe not I don't know, making some jokes that may be a little bit out of line. I don't know.
It's part of the brand, right?
I draw the line between vulgarity and humor and not to confuse them.
That's a good way to put it.
And that's kind of where I draw the line. And secondly, where I draw the line is I find it funny, Paul, for example, and if you say, I don't feel that's funny, well, it's important for me to respect at that point and say, maybe I shouldn't really, use that humor. So I have said things that I find, felt were humorous, but when somebody says it's not, it's time for me to say, okay, maybe that's not the line I want to go in. And I always also find that self-deprecating humor is the best of the breed because you're not trying to offend anybody, right? So you can target that on yourself. So that's kind of the thing that I try to really avoid is vulgarity, and also anything. One of the things we tend to forget is a lot of us are very privileged. We don't get exposed to certain situations a lot of other people are in. As men, we cannot imagine things that women go through on a daily basis, right? As just one example, and you can come up with so many other combinations of these. And to me, is one hand is not realizing what it means. On the other hand, is when I get a sense that maybe a joke that I said is not going in line with a certain group of people, that's when I try to introspect and say, maybe I should steer away and say it in a different way so it doesn't come out insulting to that group, even though genuinely I was not intending to insult, but that is not, that's not a reason to continue using those kinds of humor.
Yeah, right. But for the record, self-deprecating jokes, and if I've tried a technology and I've suffered from that technology, I give myself the right to, criticize that technology and make jokes of it. And as far as I know,
go ahead, say JavaScript. We know what you're talking about.
Well, JavaScript or any other technology, they're not persecuted species. Okay, it's just like there's a difference there.
Okay, Venkat, you are legendary for live coding. When did you make it part of your brand, and do you recommend it to others?
When I didn't have enough pain in my life, I wanted to take on more pain. I said, I'll do live coding.
You're really selling it well.
Well, so live coding is one of those things that the key to live coding, I think, is so part of the reason I like to do live coding is it's a way for you to gradually introduce a concept to the audience, right? So you are in lockstep with the audience as to where you are, but the key is to engage the audience in the process. I see some speakers who are live coding and something doesn't work, they go into mumbling. I just finished a class before this meeting and I was making mistakes in it. I would type something, the code is not working. And I'm like, folks, I'm being silly here. This is not working. What am I doing wrong? And 7, 8 people are chiming in and telling what could be possibly wrong. And most of them were not right at that instance, but one person actually debugged it and nailed it. And he said, you forgot to put a slash in front of that particular variable on line 57. I'm like, darn it, that's pretty damn good to find that, right? And credit to you that you found this and debugged this on looking at it. So I think it makes it really a live interaction with the audience if we can do it right. But it's one of those things that you really want to let go. That is the hardest problem, right? If you feel like making generally ask this question, as a programmer, do you ever type code that doesn't fail? And everybody's like, no, it fails all the time. Then why would you as a speaker want to type code that never fails? So as long as you make it a part of what you are typing, and you don't pretend that you got to get it right, then live coding becomes easier. So I would say the time I started live coding is when I realized that it's okay to make mistakes on stage and there's nothing wrong with it.
Okay, next one, Hadi first. Fact is, you're both famous. How do you handle it kind of psychologically during these events?
I've got a great family. I wanted to interrupt Hadi, but before going for that, they ground me really well.
Got it. You're not famous there.
You're never famous.
Hadi will say the same thing.
Totally. It's just like, Sometimes when I say something, my wife's like, "You're not in front of an audience. You're not on Twitter."
Oh, I'll share with you two jokes that is running in my family. My wife occasionally will look at me and say, "So you speak?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And people listen to you. I'm like, "Yeah." And then she's like, "Why?" And then she always wants to ground me. But the most common joke is we'll be in a car, and my son will ask some question. I will answer, and he'll say, "Dad, I'm not hearing you." And my wife is like, "That's because you're not paying him right now, so he's not on the clock." So this is common in the family to ground me and say, "You're not in a client site right now. You're in a conference, so you need to listen to us right now."
And they're not going to pay for your expenses.
No.
All right, last discussion point, and then we'll move on to the next segment for both of you. Again, we'll start with Hadi. This is kind of a shameless sneak peek at a coming episode for professional speaking as a whole. Will 2022 be more like 2019, 2020, or some new thing that we don't understand?
For me, I think it'll probably be a little bit like 2020.
Venkat.
I'm being optimistic, and I want it to be like 2019. It's probably going to be something in between in all realistic purposes. I think that the answer to that is it really comes down to how the next few months are going to be in different regions of the world. I keep saying every 6 months it's going to get better and change. So now, of course, we are at that mark where the next 6 months is going to lead us into 2022. So I'm really optimistic. We'll see how it goes.
Very good discussion. Thanks, both of you. Lots of folks, even in non-traditional areas, making great content, curious about the next step. We've talked about that. Let's close out with a From the Heart segment. Hadi, we'll go with you first. So many talks, so many countries, so many years. What's one big takeaway you'd like people to think about regarding professional big-time speaking?
That they do it for the right reasons. I would say, even if they may start with the wrong reasons, like IT, that they do it for the right reasons. And if they enjoy it, they continue it. I think for me, that's the most important.
Very well said. As soon as you started talking, I was thinking something like that. Venkat, you've had a distinguished speaking career, distinctive style. You've almost become an adjective. What's the one thing you'd like viewers to take away on this topic?
Being a professional speaker is a merger of two really important skills. One is your technical depth. Nobody's going to listen to you if you don't have that. And the other is your communication ability. So you're taking two really powerful things and merging them together. And so it's your responsibility to really do two things. Take two things, give out two things. One, I think, is it's your responsibility to really help the developers community that you're part of to get educated, to apply the technologies, and so be objective, be genuine about how they can get better. But also, there is another thing that I think is really important from us. I reflect back decades on where I started with, and now I think it's an opportunity for me to be the mentor, to really be the person who can help other people. So I want to know in the next 20 years, who's going to be that Hadi or who's going to be that Venkat? Because neither of us are going to be speaking, I'm going to assume. I can speak for Hadi. Maybe he's still sitting there and giving talks 25 years from now, but I don't think I'm going to be doing that. But I want to see who is that next generation. So if we can take what we know and maybe help the next generation to not just get as good as us, but better than us, I think we'd have served our purpose in this journey.
That's it for today for JetBrains Connect. Venkat, thanks for joining us, for showing people a little about life behind the stage curtains, so to speak, what it's like doing speaking at scale.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you so much for the time, Paul, and another opportunity to meet with Hadi. How could I say no to it? So I was delighted to be invited. Thanks for having me.
Maybe I should just call this the Venkat and Hadi show, or the Hadi and Venkat show. YouTube.
That sounds like one of these Tom and Jerry comedy cartoon things.
Sure.
The Venkat and Hadi show.
We're gonna come up with a jingle. I think we can do that. Hadi, you have many jobs at JetBrains, often handling the things too hard for other people to handle. You've been doing this while being a road warrior. Thanks for sharing your hard-earned wisdom.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And as Venkat said, it's always great chatting with Venkat. And you, Paul.
Thank you. All the little people, right? Thanks for watching this episode of JetBrains Connect, topics and talk from across the landscape of technology. Don't forget to leave some comments about today's show or really any feedback about JetBrains Connect. Let's hear your ideas. Want more? We got more. Click subscribe down below. See you next time.